Back here on 757 Saturday Sports Talk, like, share, and subscribe to our YouTube channel. We are privileged to be joined by a special guest now here on the program. He is one of the very best in the business when it comes to the NFL draft, breaking it down, analysis. You can find it on the web at ESPN.com. He's an insider and also on X or Twitter at NFL Draft Scout. Matt Miller, so kind of join us. Matt, thanks for taking the time. How you been?
Doing well, guys. Appreciate you having me on.
Hey, Matt.
Our pleasure. Well, a lot of talk, Matt, about the top quarterbacks and where they'll end up, some bona fide wide receiver talent. Is it one of those things or something else that distinguishes this draft to you?
Yeah, I think it starts with the quarterbacks like it does every year. But this year there are a lot of good ones. We could see as many as 4 in the top 10 picks. We could see 6 in the first round. So I think that's the driving storyline of this year's class is the quarterback play and the teams that'll be drafting them. We know the Chicago Bears like Caleb Williams from USC. The Washington Commanders have the second pick. They'll certainly have their choice of a couple of really good quarterbacks. And then from then on, it's kind of the domino effect of which teams will draft the quarterbacks. The New England Patriots are right there in the mix. The Minnesota Vikings are a team that could definitely try to trade up to grab one as well. So the quarterbacks will dominate things. Offensively, this is a really, really good draft class. In fact, we might see a record number of offensive players drafted. I think in my most recent kind of run through the first round, I had 20 offensive players going in the first 32 picks. So it is a year that's truly dominated. Quarterbacks, wide receivers, offensive tackles. You're going to hear a lot of names called at those 3 position groups when we get to Detroit on Thursday.
Wow, let's go to number 2 because that seems to be where the draft is beginning for most people after the presumptive number 1 pick being the former Heisman Trophy winner and Caleb Williams from Southern Cal to the Chicago Bears. Washington's on the clock. They have a new head coach, new people in their front office from years back. We know Daniel Snyder had the franchise, was the owner. Things went sideways for them towards the end. New name. They went from, the one name to now the Commanders. At 2, is it Jaden Daniels, do you think? Do you think it's somebody else, Drake May, J.J. McCarthy? How do you think it'll be handled? And do you think by draft night it'll be settled, or will they be on the clock still sifting through things? Will they have it all decided by the time they're on the clock?
They'll have it decided by the time they're on the clock. I think that's the benefit of being at number 2 and understanding what Chicago is going to do. So you really have a choice. I think it is between those 2 guys you mentioned. It's between Jaden Daniels, the Heisman Trophy winning quarterback from LSU, and Drake May, kind of the upside prospect in this year's class. You hear the Justin Herbert comparisons. You hear the Josh Allen comparisons to his game. So it's really down to those 2 players. But they'll have that decided by, 7:10 Eastern time Thursday night. They will know who they're going to pick. And what you're looking for right now is really solidarity, within your front office and ownership group. Josh Harris, the owner, has been very involved in this process. So between he, Adam Peters, and Dan Quinn, Cliff Kingsbury, the offensive coordinator, will certainly be in the mix as well in trying to decide who that player is. But you're looking for that unified belief in who that player will be, who the quarterback should be. It's not uncommon to be, here we are 5 days before, it's not uncommon for them to still be sifting through information, still deciding on things. They just had everyone in last week for a visit. I think the interesting factor in that right now is something that my colleague Adam Schefter said, I believe yesterday, that there's certainly a belief out there that Jaden Daniels has interest outside of Washington, and that those interests are, the Las Vegas Raiders, where he's very well connected to head coach Antonio Pierce. I think the Minnesota Vikings are a team that's really intriguing to everyone who has a needed quarterback because of the infrastructure that they have. So what's going to be interesting to watch this play out is if Jaden Daniels truly has a preference on where he's playing next year, or if he's going to say, I've been waiting my entire life to be in the NFL. I'm going to lean into this process and I'm going to go wherever I'm drafted and look to make that team better. I think by Thursday, we'll probably get some form of statement from Jaden Daniels or from his agents, either saying, hey, we're happy to go wherever we're drafted, or they might put something out and say, we're evaluating all our options as it pertains to the NFL draft, something, PR speak to that regard. But I do think that is like you said, it's where the draft starts. We know that Washington will take a quarterback. We know they're not going to trade that pick. I would say this. I remember the 2021 draft when we all thought the San Francisco 49ers were going to take Mac Jones. And a couple days before that draft, you started to hear, hey, they really like Trey Lance. They really like Trey Lance after about 2 months of, hey, they like Mac Jones. And the guy who was running the scouting department for the 49ers at that time was Adam Peters. So anyone who can tell you what Adam Peters is going to do at number 2 overall, I wouldn't believe him. I really wouldn't, because I was one of those folks that was being told it's Mac Jones for San Francisco. It's Mac Jones for San Francisco. And it wasn't. So we'll see what Adam does, but he's very well connected. He also is very tight-lipped. So I don't think we're going to get any, super credible leaks as to what they're going to do it to until they're on the clock.
As you know, this time of year, Matt, it's always the time of information and misinformation as we discuss the upcoming NFL draft, which starts on Thursday with ESPN NFL draft analyst and insider Matt Miller. Follow him on X or Twitter, as some still call it, NFL Draft Scout. It is 757 Saturday Sports Talk here on CoVA Sports TV, Ed.
Hey, Matt, you mentioned a word that I want to go over that nobody's really talking about because you don't know till it happens. Trades. And I think obviously it's going to affect the draft, and it's like a lot of people can't really predict trades. Nobody plays their hand. I saw there was a mock draft or two by somebody. Now there's a million of them, but there was actually one that had trades in it, made up their own trades. So I ask you, do you feel there's going to be some trades, and because there's so many quarterbacks and guys want to move around, where do you think you'll see a trade or two coming up that can really upset that first round?
Yeah, I think we'll see at least one, and that will be to the number 4 or number 5 pick overall. That would be a team like the Minnesota Vikings or the Denver Broncos or even the Las Vegas Raiders making their move to get that 4th quarterback if we do indeed see them go 1, 2, 3, which is the expectation right now. So that would be the big one. I think there will be some smaller secondary type trades as teams try to move for a wide receiver, or as teams maybe try to move for an offensive tackle because those are such strong positions in this year's class. But as far as the big trade that could really shake things up, I think Minnesota packaging picks 11 and 23 plus some future draft capital to get into the top 5 to get a quarterback is certainly expected at this point because, about a month ago, they added that second first-round pick from the Houston Texans. It's rare to add a second first-round pick that early because you don't know who's going to be on the board. So when Minnesota made that move, I think all expectations swung to they're loading up in order to make a move for a quarterback. Denver sitting at 12. Right now, they have Jarrett Stidham and Ben DiNucci as their 2 quarterbacks. And the market of free agent quarterbacks has really been wiped out throughout the course of this offseason. So I think the Broncos are another team that they would have to be very, very aggressive. They don't have a second-round pick this year. So you're talking a lot of future capital, but they'll certainly, I think, be one of the teams that would be pretty active in trying to get up there to get a quarterback too.
And the other thing I wanted to bring in, you hear so much about the quarterbacks because, A, you need them. And we've seen in the NFL, if you don't have a decent quarterback, you're in trouble. There's no doubt about it. Linemen, I'm always intrigued by really good linemen because if you're talking about having a good quarterback, if you're playing a rookie, you better have some people who can really protect him or he'll be running for his life. And I think, as you mentioned about, there are some pretty decent linemen. Go over some of those other names. And I guess, is it the Notre Dame guy, Alt, the number 1 guy?
Yeah, Joe Alt from Notre Dame is pretty much the clear-cut number 1 player. What's fun about this offensive line class is I had 8 players in my top 32. So there's a lot of depth this year. And it will be fun to see how quickly that depth gets wiped out because it is a premium position. But they're really good players. Olu Fashanu from the D.C. area is a high school player, goes to Penn State. He'll certainly be a top 15 pick. Tali Fuaga from Oregon State is in there as a top 15 pick. J.C. Latham from Alabama, I think will be a top 20 pick. Troy Fautanu from Washington, probably a top 20 pick as well. So it's a really good offensive line class. I got to throw in Graham Barton from Duke as another player I think could go in the first 20 to 25 selections, certainly. Amarius Mims, Tyler Guyton. I mean, it is such a deep tackle class. And I know for Commanders fans, there's certainly intrigue at that left tackle position. Having those 2 second-round picks, you're probably looking at, hey, how do we get up into the 20s to grab one of these tackles before that position is wiped out because it is so valuable. And there are teams early in this draft. It's also interesting, teams like Pittsburgh at 20, Miami at 21, Dallas at 24, Green Bay at 25. There are a lot of teams in the 20s that can take an offensive tackle. So if you're one of those clubs that has identified this draft as we're going to get better on the offensive line, you almost do need to be aggressive to get up probably into the late teens to grab one of those starting caliber tackles before they're all off the board.
Let me go there with you, Matt. The Jets picking at 10th, for example. I've heard a lot. If Alt's gone by then, which I'm guessing you and many others projecting to be off the board by then, you take Brock Bowers at tight end. They got themselves some tackle help with Smith from the Cowboys. Do you go with that second lineman, or is Brock Bowers to you? I watched him this year at Georgia, like a lot of fans did. Obviously, almost won another national championship. He's a difference maker guy when he's healthy. Do you go there, a tight end? What's your thought on that? A different type of position as opposed to the need or the better player? What's your feeling with the Jets? And are there other teams like the Jets that might have that dilemma beyond the 10 spot in that first round?
Yeah, that he's one of the interesting, I guess, pivot points because he's so talented, but he plays a position that's been devalued to some degree in the NFL draft. You know, a lot of the best tight ends in football were not first round picks. Even last year, Sam Laporta was picked 34. So there's not a great precedent for drafting a tight end in the first round and having that instant impact, at least. I think for the Jets, they have signaled that they really don't care about anything other than 2024. They have a 40-year-old quarterback coming off injury. They have a 33-year-old left tackle who hasn't played a complete season since 2015. They have a 33-year-old right tackle. They have a 30-year-old wide receiver in Mike Williams who has consistently been injured. So they are really pushing all their chips to the middle of the table and saying, if it doesn't work in 2024, the general manager and the head coach are getting fired anyway. So they are focused on this year alone. And to me, that says you're going to draft the impact player, which would be Brock Bowers in this scenario, as opposed to drafting for insurance in the future on the offensive line, which would be what I think a team that had some security would say, let's draft for the future. Let's get an offensive tackle in here that we can groom behind Tyron Smith. But because they're in this spot where they have to win right now, that's where I think someone like Bowers to pair with Aaron Rodgers and Garrett Wilson and Mike Williams probably makes more sense for them.
In our final remaining minutes here with Matt Miller, ESPN NFL Draft Analyst with us on 757 Saturday Sports Talk on CoVA Sports TV. Like, share, and subscribe. Give us a couple of sleepers. This is where you're so in-depth with this. And some names that aren't being talked about with the Williamses, the Harrisons, the Bowerses of the world that might be a round 2, round 3 guy that fans may remember from their college football days that can have value for an NFL team. Give me just a few sleepers. It could be either side of the ball that you like, Matt.
Yeah, I would say the running back position this year is full of sleepers because there's not going to be one in the first round. So in round 2, guys like Trey Benson from Florida State, Marshawn Lloyd from USC, some guys that we saw in the college football playoffs. Blake Corum is going to be a huge factor at the running back position. He might not be drafted until the 4th round. So there's really, really good value at the running back position. Same with wide receiver. I know we talked a lot about guys who are going to go early, but players like Ladd McConkey, who helped power Georgia to 3 straight amazing seasons. He's certainly in the mix, the late first, early second round pick. Keon Coleman, who we saw at Florida State for their undefeated season, he'll probably be a late first, early second round pick. Roman Wilson from Michigan, he was their go-to wideout this past year. He's a second round pick. So really great years, especially like if you're a fantasy football player. The good news is there's a lot of talent at running back, wide receiver, and even tight end of guys who are going to be drafted outside the first round. Even rounds 2 and round 3, there's really, really good depth at those spots.
Matt, I got to ask you, my team is the Raiders. That's my team. I'm not totally sold on O'Connell, the young guy quarterback, and I'm a type of Raider fan. Yeah, you want to build for the future, but we've been doing that for years. Where do the Raiders stand? Who are some guys maybe you're looking at, and is O'Connell the one they're going to go with, or maybe they're going to mess around and try to bring in a quarterback? I hear a lot about Michael Penix being picked maybe later on by the Raiders. Your assessment on the Raiders?
Yeah, like you said, you can only rebuild for so long. At some point, you got to call your shot and take your guy. And I do think they've been connected to Michael Penix Jr. for good reason. Now, do you draft him at 13? That's a little early. So I think the Raiders are one of those interesting teams that they'll probably try to get up there into the Jaden Daniels conversation. I don't know that they'll be able to just because he's a hot commodity and they're at 13. It's hard to go from 13 to 2 or to 3 to be in that range. So if they miss out on Jaden Daniels, I think an interesting thing to do is to draft an offensive lineman like a J.C. Latham at 13 and then try to get back into the first round to get Michael Penix Jr. You get him on the 5th-year option. You get him at a cost that is a great value, especially when it comes in terms of salary cap. And you put him in there. You have Gardner Minshew, who's a really fine bridge quarterback. We saw that last year in Indy when he had to replace Anthony Richardson. So you're set up pretty well in that scenario. If you can get the right tackle for the future, improve that offensive line, and then you get the young quarterback later in the first round. If they can walk away with that as a first round, I think that's a slam dunk for this new regime.
He's a fountain of information. Matt Miller, ESPN NFL draft analyst, here with us on CoVA Sports TV. So kind, and his time is so precious and limited. Before we let you run, two things I want to hit with you. This is a fertile 757 area code. I'm sure you're familiar with it, with Bruce Smith and Michael Vick, EJ Manuel, Josh Sweat just a couple years ago, Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah out of Notre Dame, ACC Defensive Player of the Year, fell to the Browns in round 2. We don't have as many prospects this year, but I want to throw a name at you. You may or may not be high on him as far as your board goes, but local player out of Virginia Beach, Tavion Robinson. He started at Cox High School, started out at Virginia Tech, went to Kentucky. Is he a guy that can get drafted later rounds? Do you have him at all in your rankings? And I know you go through it like a fine-tooth comb. Can people in the 757 hear his name called potentially on the last day?
I think he's got a shot. I wish the testing times had been a little bit better. I think that's going to hold him back. But looking at the wide receiver group, his ability to play on the inside, his quickness, his burst after the catch, his burst breaking off stem as a route runner, I think that's going to help him a ton. So he's got a shot. I have him rated as a 7th round to undrafted free agent. I put a 30 on him, which is what that grade means. But I do think he's got a shot, especially with, some of the new special teams format in the NFL. You need guys who can be returners. He's got that, I think, elusiveness as a runner with the ball in his hands that could certainly help him out in that regard.
Look at that, Ed. He broke it down for a guy that most people that are these draft experts on TV that would know. He did it to a science, and that you nailed Tavion. We watched him in high school. He was terrific. He's a little bit undersized, has some question marks, but he could find his way potentially as one of those great guys. Go ahead.
And Matt, I know one person you don't have on that draft board, and that's the dude right over here, Hatfield. So that's why you're the best at what you do.
Hey, Matt, before we let you go, we thank you so much. You've just given us tons and tons of great information. How can people check out your work on ESPN.com? What do you have leading up to the draft and post-draft? What can they find online and check it out?
Yeah, I just posted my top 475 players, which Tavion Robinson's in there, so people can check that out. I'll have my final mock draft dropping Wednesday, and then I'll be on the ESPN coverage, all throughout the draft. So all day on Thursday and Friday with shows like Get Up, SportsCenter, NFL Live, and then Saturday you can catch me on the set breaking down all the picks from rounds 4 through 7.
You'll see him with Shefty and Louis Riddick and Kuiper and the whole crew with ESPN. Matt Miller, so great with us here today. Thank you so much. Enjoy the draft. It'll be wall-to-wall fun for us all, and then I know you'll get some sleep a couple days after it's done.
Cannot wait for that, guys. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much. Matt Miller with us here on 757 Saturday Sports Talk on CoVA Sports TV. How cool was that? Getting one of the big timers with us for 15 plus minutes. He gave us actually about 20 minutes today.
And he knows his stuff. He really knows his stuff.
How many guys would have been like, with Tavion Robinson? He just rattled it off like he was off. He knew it like that from Cox High School. Maybe